Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Harvard professor and former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Jason Furman. Professor, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be with you.
Certainly a lot to discuss. We have seen tariff chaos in the past week, so let's just break it down really quick to recap. On April 2nd, what President Trump dubbed as Liberation Day, he unveiled his sweeping tariff policy. They went into effect on Wednesday night, right after midnight, and then a little over 12 hours later, President Trump completely reversed course. He paused most of the reciprocal tariffs. There's going to be a baseline 10% on most trading partners, and he continued to ratchet up the trade war with China. From the perspective of an economist, can you make sense of the moment we're in right now?
It's in some sense very difficult to make sense of because it's just so unprecedented, the speed with which all of this has happened, the amount that it's been changing day by day. But some things are quite obvious, which is the sign. Prices will go up because of this. GDP will be lower because of this. And just how much depends on all sorts of complicated factors that are still unfolding.
I want to read something that you said yesterday, and that was before the pause. And you said this: I don't see how the president can get rid of what is now a massive amount of uncertainty, and that the only way to put that genie back in the bottle would be for Congress to take tariff-setting power back to itself. Do you think that the genie is now in the bottle when it comes to President Trump deciding to pause the tariffs? And how much uncertainty is out there, considering the White House was going on for a week saying he's not going to pause, he's not going to blink, and then he essentially did pause?
There is still a huge amount of uncertainty. Tariffs on a lot of countries are 10. They could easily go to 20. They could easily go to 30. By the way, uncertainty is both directions. They could also go to 0. If you think a tariff might fall, you're going to hold off on your purchases and, wait to see if it falls. So that genie is still very much out of the bottle. So there's a bit more certainty than there was before the president announced the 90-day pause, but there's still just a huge amount of anything can happen.
Do you think that President Trump's tariff policy is a bit right now like the boy who cried wolf, the president that cried tariff, essentially, because this is not the first time he's paused. He's paused before with Canada and Mexico. He's ratcheted up with China. I mean, what does that uncertainty do? What are those long and short-term implications of that?
In general, it just says you're better off waiting before you make a decision. And if lots of businesses all reach that conclusion at the same time, they all wait, they all hold off on some capital plan because they don't know what's going on. That's the type of thing that creates a dynamic that leads to a recession. The thing you want to do as an economic policymaker, the most important thing is certainty and predictability. That's the first rule of economic policymaking, and that's the very last thing that's going on right now.
Do you think that the chance for any type of certainty is gone now, considering this whiplash that we've seen within the past week?
Yeah, I continue to think that unless Congress takes back the power to set tariffs, it is their power. They granted it to the president. Or if the Supreme Court says you're not allowed to do this because you're not allowed to make up brand new massive areas of policy all on your own. Absent one of those things, President Trump is president for 3 3/4 years. Trade deficits, that's his biggest frustration. They're still going to be with us. In fact, we could see those trade deficits growing with countries like Vietnam and Japan as things, that used to be traded with China end up coming from those countries.
I know there have been escalating recession fears after President Trump unveiled his sweeping tariff policy in the beginning of April. And earlier this week, the chief economist at Moody's, Mark Zandi, said that he believed that the chance of a recession this year was at 60%. And the only reason that wouldn't happen is if there was some sort of off-ramp. Now that we're seeing this pause, what do you think about a recession? Do you think that this was an off-ramp?
This pause is a partial off-ramp for sure. And it's eased my recession fears some, but they're still very, very elevated because not just the direct effect of all of it, but all the uncertainty that we've been talking about, the pessimism that consumers has, what's going to start happening when you really do see this at the stores you're shopping at and the like.
President Trump was asked about his motivation behind pausing the tariffs, and it was reported that he paused them largely because he saw the bond market's reaction. He said it was because he saw people getting queasy. He also used the word yippee. What are your thoughts on his reasoning behind pausing the tariffs?
Look, it's good news that he pays attention to markets because markets tell us some really important things. And having some feedback mechanism and governor is a good thing. The bond market was definitely, I don't know exactly what yippee is, but I don't know exactly what was going on in the bond market either. So we might as well call whatever it was yippee. But it's still the case that the broad market equities are down about 10% this year. And that is because of the tariffs that are still in place. If he took away all of the tariffs, that market would go back up 10% or more tomorrow. So he's still somebody that is willing to tough it out to a greater degree than certainly I would have expected 6 months ago.
In the same post where he announced the reciprocal tariff pause, President Trump said that he was ratcheting up this trade war with China. In that post, he said that the tariff would be raised to 125%. Just before you and I hopped on this call here, on Thursday, the White House said that they were actually at 145%. What do you make of this trade war escalation, this tit for tat with China?
China's our third most important trade relationship in the world. It matters an enormous amount to both our consumers and our businesses. Now, 125, 145, even 104, all of those are almost prohibitive for a lot of things. And what you're going to see is things getting shipped from China to a neighboring country, Singapore, Vietnam, and then coming from there to the United States and avoiding the tariffs. Now, we'll try to stop that, but stopping that will be a game of whack-a-mole. So a certain amount of, flexibility and substitution will get around this, but not everything can.
And it doesn't seem as of now that the United States or China is going to blink. Every time the United States has imposed tariffs, China has responded with retaliatory tariffs themselves. Who do you think is going to blink first? Is there any indication, China or the United States? And what does this mean for the everyday American if neither does?
Yeah, so part of it is who is more hurt by it. And I think right now it looks to me like the United States could be more hurt by this escalation of the trade war than China. China has long had a problem with not enough fiscal stimulus, not enough demand, not enough consumer spending, but they're taking steps to fix that. So they're doing some big macroeconomic steps to insulate their economy from the trade war. We're not taking steps like that in the United States. We'd have a much harder time doing it here. So I think it's possible they can insulate themselves. They can tough it out. They don't have a political system of the type that we do, and so that they can outlast us and we'll have to blink. But, if the two countries blink simultaneously, that's fine with me too.
Through this policy, it really seems that President Trump views global trade as there is a winner and there is a loser, and he wants America to obviously always be the winner. From an economist's perspective, is that the best way to look at it?
No, of course not. Gains from trade. If you buy something from a store, the store is happy to have your money. You're happy to have the product. No one took advantage of everyone else. International trade functions in the same way. And it's not like with this trade war, you've seen people increasing the growth forecast for one country and lowering it for the other. They're lowering it for everyone. The only question is whose growth forecast is going down more than the other. So it's all about what share of the pain you're feeling. But I'd rather no one, and especially not the United States, feels any pain. The only way to do that is to go back to a greater degree of trade integration.
Americans have been having economic concerns since pre-November 2024, and that was the top issue facing voters this election. And within the past week, when I've talked to voters about the impacts and the implications of the tariff policy, the questions I've gotten are, is now a good time to buy a car? What does this do to my summer vacation? Will grocery prices increase? I don't even want to look at my 401k. Will that bounce back? I mean, when the everyday average American hears that President Trump paused this for 90 days, largely, what should the reaction be? I mean, how does this impact them?
First of all, for most people in the market, you're not going to be able to outguess the professionals. The professionals themselves aren't able to outguess and outpredict Donald Trump. So buying and holding is almost always the right strategy. That's certainly what I'm doing right now and think people should do. As you're doing consumer purchases and the like, it gets trickier. Do you want to buy iPhones now while you still can? Or do you want to hold off on that purchase because you're not sure what's going to happen to your 401k? There's a lot of ways in which consumers will and should adjust to all of this.
I think it's important in these tariff conversations to timestamp where we are right now because things have been changing really by the hour. It's Thursday afternoon. What specifically are you looking out for next?
I'm looking out for both unemployment is going to be going up and inflation is going to be going up. What is going to be the ratio of those two and which of those shoes is going to drop first? So all of the macro data we've gotten so far is for the month of March. The job market looks great in March. Inflation looks fantastic in March. What happens when we get the April data? What happens when we get the May data? What happens when we get the June data? That's what my eyes will be on.
Well, when we get the April, May, and June data, I hope you come back on and join me. Thank you so much for coming on. You are welcome back anytime.
Thanks for having me.